Hi, this is Cheryl Gallant, your Conservative Member of Parliament for the hopeful riding of Renfrew-Nipissing-Pembroke. We're back in Ottawa this week with a new look for the show. Over the past weeks, much has come to light. So let's flick the switch and get a look at what we've missed so far. Justin Trudeau stated that he learned of allegations of sexual misconduct against General Vance recently, but we now know this is false. We learned the Prime Minister's office was made aware of allegations of sexual misconduct against the former Chief of Defence Staff at least 3 years ago. For 3 years, Justin Trudeau hid this information from Canadians. When asked about it, he made the decision to mislead Canadians. Why did they try to hide the fact that they knew about it? Both Prime Minister Trudeau and Minister Sajjan have a history with this sort of deception. We've learned new troubling details, clearly pointing to a deliberate cover-up. A seemingly coordinated campaign to threaten a person tasked to flag allegations of sexual misconduct occurred. This includes telling the individual that if he cooperated with the Commons Defence Committee's investigation, his career in the military would be over. Justin Trudeau and his Liberal government have gone to great lengths to cover up these allegations of sexual misconduct in the Canadian Armed Forces. But why? We ask a lot of our brave Canadian women who serve in the Canadian Armed Forces. In return, we have a duty to protect those who have sworn an oath to protect all of us. Impeding a member of the Canadian Armed Forces from fulfilling his sworn duty, then making threats to secure his silence, is a clear and concerning abuse of power. Why did the Liberal government go to such great lengths in order to hide the truth from Canadians? It's appalling. The Conservatives believe that government should be open and transparent with Canadians at all times, especially when it comes to something as serious as a report of sexual misconduct allegations. I pressed Sajjan to come clean.
For Renfrew-Nipissing-Pembroke.
Mr. Speaker, in March of 2018, the military ombudsman met with the defense minister to confidentially advise him of an allegation made against the head of the Canadian military. The minister refused to look at the evidence and the meeting ended. The next day, the Prime Minister's department asked the ombudsman to divulge the details of the case. He refused to break his word and tendered his resignation. 3 years later, the matter became public, yet the minister feigned surprise. Who was the minister trying to protect? Himself or the Prime Minister?
Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, no elected official should ever be part of an investigation. And that is why I immediately informed PCO, who's in charge of Governor and Council appointments, to take up this matter. And they immediately contacted the Ombudsman, whose job it is to investigate allegations, Mr. Speaker. And I look forward to going to committee to testify there once again. Thank you.
Canadians deserve the truth. That's why we called for an emergency meeting of the Defence Committee. We must get to the bottom of how and why this cover-up was orchestrated. Who can direct?
Sorry, I just want to be explained that no. This should be, when he says the ombudsman is actually independent of the chain of command, the chain of command also includes the chief of defense staff.
Okay, so who can direct the CFNIS to open an investigation?
To see it, only they themselves no one should interfere with CFNS.
So the ombudsman could not do that.
Investigation.
He could not start an investigation into the criminal charges or criminal allegations himself. Okay, I just
No, but the information in the directives to the ombudsman, as information comes in, can go to the provost marshal, which is military police, can go to the judge advocate general for more advice as well. So any criminal investigation can be started by the military police when they receive information. However, the information that the ombudsman receives is the internal investigation, and then they go further out from there. But as Mr. Walburn had said, he knows his job on what needed to be done.
He sought direction from you, given the rank of this individual. So
Actually, why would you ask advice from the Minister of National Defense? Because the ombudsman's job is to advise.
For direction on this, and that's.
I can't give direction.
I don't want to.
I can't give direction on investigations.
So I do have a couple quick questions for Deputy Minister Thomas. First for you. There you have it. That's why Canadians deserve the truth. That's why we called for that emergency meeting on the Defence Committee. We have to get to the bottom of how and why this cover-up was orchestrated. Now, since our last episode, we also learned that Pfizer was not consulted by the National Advisory Committee on Immunization's recommendation to push the prescribed time between doses of COVID-19 vaccines from 3 weeks to 4 months. This recommendation sets a new precedent in the delay between doses, going against the schedules of other countries around the world. When asked about whether partial immunity from a 4-month delayed second dose creates the conditions for vaccine-resistant strains to emerge, experts expressed concern. This is a significant issue, and the federal government has yet to tell Canadians how it would protect our country from a new resistant strain. The 4-month delay of the second dose has no data to support the safety of the measure. We know from academic reports that the emergence of vaccine-resistant variants could become a concern if Canadians are only partially immunized from incomplete vaccination. Pfizer Canada President Cole Pinot said that the advice goes against Pfizer's monograph guidance for optimal, safe, and effective use of the drug, saying it creates concern, confusion, and potential hesitancy. Justin Trudeau's happy to take this risk to mask his abysmal failure to secure vaccines when most other developed countries were placing orders. Instead, our Liberal Prime Minister kept our country back by partnering with a company affiliated with the Chinese Communist government. That company used Canadian-funded research to make its vaccine, but left Canadian researchers empty-handed. All the while, 2 Canadian sons languish under horrendous conditions. While Conservatives are relieved that vaccines are beginning to arrive in Canada, the delays caused by the government mean that Canada is behind other countries in its plan to reopen the economy. We want the government to succeed in getting COVID-19 vaccines to Canadians who want them. But like the president of Pfizer, Conservatives are concerned that the Liberal government's inability to explain their decision-making could lead to the vaccine hesitancy. This government has left health officials scrambling to extend the time between doses, but Canadians will be the ones to pay the price. I know Liberals throw out comments such as trust the experts, but Trudeau's government ignored these very same experts weeks ago when they advised not to give the AstraZeneca vaccine to people aged 65 years and over. This proves Trudeau will listen to experts when it's politically expedient to do so, but ignore them when it suits his purpose. As a member of Her Majesty's official opposition, my job is to hold the government to account. When it comes to extending the internet, rural Canadians have been kept behind. So I send newsletters to constituents by snail mail. Recently, I recounted how our Liberal government has the worst record on the pandemic. This confused some uninformed readers who rely on unreliable sources of information. They wish to see proof of Trudeau's failures, as if the economic carnage is not enough. So here's some evidence. According to the Macdonald-Laurier Institute, Canada has suffered more than average, ranking 11th out of 15 countries on its misery index. The index uses mortality rates, visits to intensive care units, the pace of the vaccinations, lockdown stringency, GDP changes and unemployment, among other things, and rated Canada's performance on a scale from 0 to 100 in each category. Among G7 countries, Canada has borrowed the most per capita, yet seen the most unemployment. Maybe that would have been worth it if it meant saving lives. But we only perform better than the United States, the UK, and slightly ahead of Italy and France on per capita deaths. My colleague, Pierre Poilievre, elaborated on these points.
For Canadians, and that's exactly what we did.
The honourable member for Carleton.
Well, congratulations. The Prime Minister knows that Japan is in the G7. Maybe he should also know that Japan has 1/10 the COVID fatality rate of Canada. So let's start judging results. He's delivered the highest unemployment rate in the G7, the worst vaccination rate, and now we find from a scientific and statistical study of health and well-being, he has delivered among the highest levels of misery for the biggest price. Why does the Prime Minister judge his success simply by how expensive he can be, not by how many lives he can save?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we know this has been a hard year for Canadians, and we've all had to look out for each other. We're grateful for Canadians' hard work and resilience, and as we said, we have their backs. We know it hasn't always been easy, and we've ensured easy access to digital tools and resources that provide information and support. Wellness Together Canada has provided hundreds of thousands of Canadians with confidential support during the tough times of this pandemic. If anyone needs support, we'll be there for them.
The honourable member for Carleton.
What was that? Is he really going to expect us to believe that when I ask him about having the worst vaccination rates, the worst jobless rate, among the highest misery rate during COVID, the best he can do is stand up and read some talking points that were written for him by his bureaucrats? Why can't he show a little bit of contrition for his failures? This Prime Minister has cost the most to achieve the worst results, and what he expects us now to do is to just continue down this failed path. If the Prime Minister wants the confidence of Canadians, will he tell them what will he change to reverse the failures that he has delivered thus far?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
I can understand the frustration of the member opposite being amongst the many Canadians who've lost their jobs during this pandemic. The fact is, we have been there to support Canadians every step of the way by investing in families, by investing in workers, by knowing that the best way through this pandemic is to be there to support them. And that is exactly what we have done and what we will continue to do. We've been there for people because we made a simple promise to have their backs as long as it took and as much as it took, not just because it's the right thing to do, but it's the best way to ensure that our economy comes roaring back after this pandemic. We will continue to be there for the Canadians, regardless of what the opposition says.
Hear, hear.
The Honourable Member for Kildonan St. Paul.
Now, the MacDonald-Laurier Institute only looked into 15 countries. They did not control for size or population density, democracy or dictatorship, rich or poor. The Lowy Institute in Australia did, and they created an index that places Canada 66th out of 98. If you only watch CBC and only look at the US deaths, then Canada might look pretty good. But the minute you look at any other metric, we don't measure up so well. Now, I doubt those upset about this will take my word or the word of some institutes, but what about the word of the Justin Trudeau government? In the Trudeau government's own audit entitled Lessons Learned from the Public Health Agency of Canada's COVID-19 Response, we read, quote, the agency required skills and expertise, had limited public health expertise, including epidemiologists, and no clear understanding of how to compile data. Well, they sure know how to compile data on law-abiding citizens. The Trudeau Liberals have failed Canadians, but we can do better. Since the start of the pandemic, Conservatives have been ahead of the curve in calling for border closures, rapid testing, greater surveillance to guard against variants, and greater assistance for employers and renters, not bending the curve after letting the spread occur. The Liberals were slow to either catch up or still haven't gotten on board. Whether or not Canada has the worst record in the world or among the worst really isn't the point. The point is that under Trudeau, we've had a worse record than we needed to. Live from Ottawa, this is Cheryl Gallant, wishing you a good night.